Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bite Sized Chunks of Faith. My name is Jono Pierce, and in this podcast, I want to share how having a Christian faith has brought hope and meaning and purpose to my life. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Bite Sized Chunks of Faith. My name is Jono Pierce, and if this is your first time listening to the podcast, you're especially welcome. We've lots of back episodes if you like to listen, and if you like to share them, if you find one that's helpful, we're always delighted when people do that. Sometimes it is my pleasure on the show to have guests on the podcast who share something of their life and their spiritual journey. And today I'm delighted to introduce to you a wonderful guest called Niamh McAnally. Niamh has just written a powerful memoir called Following Sunshine. And I got to read an advance copy of her memoir, and we're going to be chatting about her book and her incredible journey through life in this week's episode. So, Niamh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be with you.
And for those who are joining us and maybe don't know anything of your story, I wonder if you could tell our listeners, Niamh, a little bit about yourself, where you live, what you do, and maybe a little bit about your family.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me. So yes, I'm Niamh McAnally. I'm actually known as the writer on the water because I lived on a sailboat for 6 years, cruising up and down the Bahamas and the Caribbean and the East Coast of America. And I'm now based in Southwest Florida. But I grew up in Ireland, the youngest daughter of two actors, Ray McAnally and Ronnie Masterson. And my brothers, Angus McAnally and Conor McAnally, were also in the entertainment industry, and my sister Moira. And I left home when I was about 17 and moved to Paris to study French language and literature at the Sorbonne International class. And my life took off from there. What can I say?
Well, I know your family are a renowned family in terms of acting and the entertainment industry. And I know for myself growing up in Ireland, it must, I think, have been maybe challenging sometimes when every time you went out and about, probably people would have recognized maybe your parents or some of the family. And I'd imagine that might have been quite difficult, was it, when you were growing up?
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about my childhood in Ireland recently, and the thing about it is everybody has their own normal, and if that's what you're used to, that's normal. Do you know what I mean? Now, the interesting thing is because I grew up in the 70s, I was an absolute young child in the 60s, the difference compared to today was yes, my parents were well known. Yes, my father was very recognizable. And indeed, my brother Angus and Connor, they were both on, Angus was on Anything Goes as a children's program. Connor was on Frontline. They were more recognized in the street, say, than I was. But when you think about Hollywood A-listers today, their children are up on Instagram, they're all across social media, so they have a more difficult time, say, than I did. I wasn't recognized. My name was known. I was always the daughter of or the sister of, but my face wasn't recognized. So, thankfully, I've always still been able to go to the grocery store without being bothered too much. But the other thing, too, on the other side of that is a lot of people in the entertainment industry, they look for fame and fortune and, get the next break, etc. And then to me, it's like, okay, well, it's the fans that put you there. So you do owe respect to your fans also. You can't be suddenly so important that, you're not going to stop in the street and sign an autograph, etc. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about your wonderful book, which I really, really enjoyed reading. And I hope that people maybe at the end of our conversation might be encouraged themselves to pick up a copy. But one of the kind of the key themes of your book is about travel. And you share some of your adventures in this wonderful memoir. I wonder, what was it, do you think, maybe sparked your love for travel, or was that always there?
That's interesting. And I think everybody growing up in Ireland, I guess because it's a small country, the amount of people from Ireland who actually travel is extraordinary compared to if you look at maybe Americans, where I am now. Yes, it's grown a little bit here. When I first came to America, only 17% of the nation held a passport. And I think in Ireland, we were born with a passport in one hand and a bag in the other, you know. But there's a specific moment in my childhood that I think set me on this path, if you like. And my dad had been cast in a film for 5 weeks, a film shoot. And due to a change in the casting, he was let go on the first day. And the producers paid out his contract. So apart from putting money aside for emergencies and stuff like that, he decided he would take us on our first overseas holiday, and that was to Spain. And I remember I was 12. I remember distinctly it was February. And I thought, wait a minute. People have been holding out on me. There's countries where the sun shines in February with blue sky and it's warm. What is going on here? So, right then and there, I said to my parents, you know what I want for my birthday? I want an atlas. And I knew as soon as I'm old enough to leave home, I'm going to start traveling. I'm going to go to countries where the sun shines and where it's warm and also where other people come on holidays, right? So you get to meet them. You're not like stuck in a corner somewhere. And the other thing was growing up later on, I took up scuba diving. And one of the places in Ireland that we dove was on the backside of Lambay Island off the coast of Dublin. And it's a private island. And I was always intrigued about that. There's a place you're not allowed to go. You know, if somebody else lives there, you're not allowed to get on that island. And that kind of gave me my love of traveling to remote islands that are accessible only by ferry or sea or private boat or something like that. I loved that. And then I think the final crux of it was in my final year at school, English was my favorite subject. And I'd always written throughout my childhood and, throughout my life, actually. But in English, we had to study a series of essays by Cardinal John Henry Newman, The Idea of a University.
Hmm.
And my memory from that one was that he'd said it was a school of knowledge of every kind, consisting of teachers and learners from every quarter. And to me, I finished school at the end of the 70s. And to me at the time, Ireland was quite a homogenous society. I mean, compared to today, where it's much more diversification in Ireland. And I thought, well, I'm really not going to be exposed to different creeds and cultures and kind of experience the world like that if I stay in Dublin. And I thought I loved French. That was my other favorite subject was French language. I said, and that's why I really want to go to learn French and live in Paris. So that's what started it. And after a year there, so when I was about 19 when I came back to Ireland, and that was it. I knew from then on I would always want to just go visit. There's so much world to see. And partly because we were with this international class, and the only thing we had in common was that French was not our mother tongue, but it was the only language in which we could like communicate. So
Right.
that was an amazing experience. So yeah, that was the start, I think.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And one of the key elements when people hopefully get the copy of your book in their hands, one of the key elements in your travels has been to volunteer around the world, and you've done all sorts of things in all sorts of places. And you mentioned there particularly your love for islands and remote places. And I guess this element of volunteering, I find that really interesting. And I wonder why for you is volunteering so important?
Well, I think part of the reason we travel is to experience other nations, other countries, other people, and how they exist and how they view the world. And if you go, for me, if you go as a tourist, say for a 2 week holiday, you see the country or the people through the lens of a tourist. And for me, if you want to go and really understand people, you need to be there for a longer period of time. And for me, I volunteered. It gave me the chance to live in the community itself. And my friends were people from the community. They weren't like other expats, let's say. And to do that, I also felt that, yes, I need to learn from other people, but also I can share my creed, culture, and everything else with them. And for me, the best way to do that was volunteering. It was almost like a win-win because I could understand where they were coming from and I could open up my viewpoints and then have an open and honest discussion, you know. And I learned in a few different countries such different customs and traditions. And you kind of look at it and kind of go, well, that's not the way we do it in Ireland or in America or wherever else. But then just because we do it differently doesn't mean it's wrong the way they do it, you know, and it just opens your mind. And I think part of the experience of travel is to open your mind and be open-minded, which kind of puts you in a non-judgmental kind of frame of mind and a sense of gratitude there. That's where if ever I would try and get back to my center, if you like, it's to live in a place of gratitude for what we already have, you know?
Brilliant. Brilliant. I guess another one of the kind of the key elements that run through your book, which really struck me reading about your life and your travels, um, was resilience, because you're somebody who's been through many pretty challenging experiences, and again, um, I let people read your book for themselves, but you've walked through some difficult times in terms of abuse and divorce and the loss at times of jobs, I think, which were important to you. And I guess all those experiences, when I was reading the book, I was thinking, how do you get up and go again after something that's been really challenging and really difficult? And I wonder, what would you say has made you such a resilient person?
Well, yes, I think looking back from the outside in, people tell me I'm resilient, but I also think that we all have that sense of resilience in us, like that instinct to survive. And I think that we all share different heartaches throughout our journey. I mean, otherwise, what are we here for if we're not to open up and expand, you know? And these periods of change in our life is what promotes growth, if you like, our own personal growth on our journeys. And for me, I definitely would credit my parents and their style of living in terms of being freelance actors. They never knew where the next job was coming from. Sometimes they'd get cast only for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. They still manage to put, you know, a solid roof over our heads and great nutritious meals for our bellies, you know. And so that sense that you can reinvent yourself all the time was always part of my growing up, if you like. Um, you can take that a step further. I think there's a couple of times where I could have laid down and said, okay, that's enough. And there was a period where I did reach kind of really despair when I was in my mid 50s, I think it was. And I thought, you know what? What else? What else is there? What's the point anymore? I don't know. And I remember going downhill for about 3 days. And I was contacted by a friend of mine in Australia who I'd met on my travels, very enlightened guy. And he just asked the right question at one point. He said to me, what is the one thing that you've never done that you've always wanted to do? And instantly I knew, I just said, I've always wanted to work at sea. And he goes, well, what is it you need to do to be employable to work at sea? And I said, I don't know. And he goes, well, why don't you find out? And so that literally got me up off the floor, you know. And what I've learned from those experiences is that it turning the corner of coming out of something doesn't happen in a big babam. It's baby steps. So the next morning I got up and I found out what do I actually need to be able to be employable to work at sea. And I found out it was a certification for seamanship and safety and all that good stuff, right? And in the end, and I moved from that period and I did the course and I came out with my certificate, but I couldn't get hired because I was too old. Everybody said, "Oh, you need to be 20 to be working on the mega yachts, you know, that they're looking for Ken and Barbie and all that good stuff." And I went, "Okay." From the outside looking in, people thought, "Oh, well, here she goes again. You know, she's starting something new and she still hasn't succeeded at that." For me, that wasn't the issue. For me, it got me up and got me going the next day. You know what I mean? When I was really down and out. And I learned from that is that just that tiny step, if you know where your goal is, and if you take one step at a time and keep moving towards whatever that is, you'll get there. and that's what I've employed every time I've had a major shift in life. And there's been a few. And the other thing I learned was that if I looked at some of the stuff that happened to me and I think it wasn't that bad compared to some of the stuff people experience. And so I pushed it down, if you like, and I thought, well, it's no big deal. Like, dust yourself off and get on with it. What I've learned later in life is if you don't actually address those issues yourself and find your way through them and forgive yourself for believing what was a falsehood and not the truth, and coming to the truth in yourself and understanding that, you owe it to yourself to resolve those issues. Because even though they're not, this is something I wrote in the book Following Sunshine, is even if they weren't a 10 in somebody else's experience, they were a 10 in my experience and they needed my attention.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think those are powerful lessons, and I love that thing you're describing there about, just taking the next step, and picking yourself up, and another writer that I really admire is a guy. He makes travel documentaries called Simon Reeve,
Mm.
and he entitled his biography "One More Step." Because again, he started from a very difficult place, and somebody encouraged him to take a small step, and that set him on his journey. It's exactly what you're describing there, and it's a very, I think, a very powerful life lesson, isn't it? Just to be able to take one more step. Yeah.
I think you're right. And I think it's because that if we try and see, okay, I'm over here, I'm at point A and I need to get to point Z or Z if you're American, it seems overwhelming. But if you need to get from A to B, you go, okay, I can manage that little bit. Now what's the next step? I think one of the stories I have in the book is climbing a pole in Fiji. And the idea was you climbed this 60-foot pole, then you stood up on the top and you jumped to a trapeze in front of you, which seems simple. But well, I clambered up. I was halfway up. I think I was doing really, really well. And then I looked down and I went, whoo,
Yeah.
I was like, what am I doing up here? This is insane. And then my body went into fight or flight mode and just started shaking uncontrollably. And I couldn't go up or down. And the leader from the ground was saying to me, Niamh, what would it mean to you to get to the top? And I'm thinking, it's so far away and so outside of my brain power at the moment that I stayed frozen. And a few minutes later, she said, what would it mean to you to get to the next rung? And I went, hmm. And then I thought, well, if I could get to the next rung, the weight would be off my left leg and it would be on my right. And so the left leg would stop shaking. So actually, all I need to do to get out of this frozen moment is to get to the next rung. And that to me has almost become a metaphor now. And I got actually to the top. I stood up, but as soon as I got on the top, I actually fell off. I never got to jump to the trapeze. And then, of course, I was beating myself up because I didn't do it perfectly. And that was another major lesson for me, was that just because you don't do it perfectly doesn't mean it wasn't okay. And it doesn't mean that, on another attempt, you might be perfect at it, and another attempt, you might be worse at it. So showing up and being the best you can be today with what you have, what you know, all the knowledge and experience you have, that's the best of who you are today. And I think in general, we need to be a little bit kinder to ourselves, because if somebody else said, wow, Niamh, you did amazing. And I'm like, no, I didn't. And they go, we need to actually be those outside cheers sometimes for our own selves, and say, actually, yeah, you did okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to ask you a really hard question now because in your book, you share experiences of your travels in many places, and I'm going to ask you in terms of your global travels, are there particular places that have a very special place in your heart?
Ooh, that's a hard one to choose from. I've
It is.
traveled to what,
Yeah.
over 65 countries at this point.
Yeah.
A lot of them have been by the water, because the water for me is what draws my soul. Some people it's the mountains, some people it's the city, but for me it's the water. And it always rebalances me. So anywhere on, in, or under the ocean. But I would say, and there's been some amazing places in Tonga and Fiji and Vanuatu, and also Donegal. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't
Hmm.
have to be exotic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just the feeling you get. But I probably would have to say Bora Bora in French Polynesia and South Pacific. And the reason I say that is because I had a picture of it on my wall, and it was my, if you want to use the term bucket list, it was the top and had been in the top for years, years and years and years. It stayed on the list, and I didn't go there for two reasons. One, it's very expensive, and number two, it's the honeymoon capital of the world, right? So it's full of lovers, young and old. Obviously, the young ones are paid for by somebody else, and then the older people for their 50th wedding anniversary or whatever maybe have saved up their whole lives to go, right? So I kept putting it off. And two reasons. One, I didn't want to be among a bunch of couples when I was divorced, single, mid 50s, and like, where's my life going? I thought, well, I don't want to be, everybody's going to be strolling on the beach and looking amazing, and I'm going to be like, here I am. And the other was because it was expensive. But I happened to be down in a volunteer project in Tonga, and I said, how often am I going to have, how many days do you have left in life, and you can't keep putting things off. So I found a way to do it very economically, which was through a little pension on the main island of Aitapi, and then, lived off the food trucks and that kind of thing. But I experienced the lagoon and that incredible aqua blue water like everybody else. And I ended up staying there for something like 8 days for the price of one night normally it would cost you, right? And one of the funniest parts of it was a real like slap you around the head kind of moment was I was so scared about being single in this place. There was nobody there because guess what? They were on their honeymoons. They were back in their bungalows honeymooning, And so it was a real slap in the head. And I went, Niamh, if there's one thing you've learned out of this experience, never ever put off a dream. You've got one shot at this life and you don't know how many days we have. So do what feels right.
Brilliant. Brilliant. One of the other things that I noticed in some of the stories you share in your book is that you seem to form a great bond, I thought, with children and young people, and very often in some of those volunteer projects you're involved in or roles that you played when you offered to help in different places, you did some work homeschooling, I remember. And I guess when you form those bonds with children and young people, um, they kind of make a real impression upon them, I always think, because and maybe it's a very formative time in their lives, and they'll always remember this Irish lady who came into their midst at that time and did stuff with them and did some homeschooling and whatever. I wonder, when you think about those kind of roles and your bonds and links with young people and children, have you any advice for young people who are growing up in what's a very complex world these days?
Isn't it just? Yeah. And I think, funnily enough, every generation, the young people always have a complex because it's different from the previous generation. But you mentioned the homeschooling there. One of my volunteer projects was in the Kingdom of Tonga for an Australian family who had two teenage children, and the parents ran a swim with the whale business. So they lived on the catamaran for the whaling season. And when I say whaling season, I mean when the whales come up from Antarctica to give birth to the young. I'm not talking about the killing whaling seasons. And they wanted me to be the tutor for the children because I am not a teacher. And I made that very clear from the outset. But it was to get their homework sent in on time to the distance learning by a computer. But by the time I got there, they had started to eke out a living on this very small remote island. And so they didn't have any internet. It was like 8 hour sail away. So that was welcome to homeschooling. And I went like, I'm not a teacher. What am I going to do? So at that stage in life, you have to get resourceful. So what I did was we started doing maths and stuff like that with like sticks and stones and do times table and everything else like that, and try to make it fun and kinesthetic. But what was very interesting for me, and this is what I would say for anybody growing up now, is they weren't learning about sustainability. They were living on this tiny island where there was water, a beach, a jungle, and they were creating a homestead there, if you like. And they weren't learning about it, they were living it. And I think one of the problems today is we are all, not just young people, but we are all so connected to our telephones, to our computers, to our laptops, to everything. And for me, I think the most important thing is to go unplugged at some point during your week. Try and shut down the screen time. And I find it fascinating sometimes you be in somebody's home and there's two teenagers and they're both texting, but they're actually texting each other. They're in the same room, and it's kind of like, well, why don't you just look up and make personal contact with humans? And I think that's one of the dangers that we've shied away from. Like my suggestion would be get out in nature, speak to people, talk with people, rather than just be at the end of a computer or a phone.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And we've only been talking about it in our house today. We have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, and the screen battle is one that we fight a bit in this house too. Um, One of the lovely sections of your book, Niamh, shares something about your meeting with Gary Krieger. And I can see you smile as you say that. The listeners may not see that, but tell our listeners, please, about who is Gary Krieger and how did you meet him?
Gary Krieger has been the catalyst for change in my life. And it's like all the parts leading up to this moment from when I met him was getting prepared to meet him. And I say that for a reason. First of all, who is he? Gary Krieger is an American born out of Los Angeles. I had a long-term marriage and a long-term land-based career. And at age 68, I want to say, he he had a major shift in his life. He ended up getting divorced, and he thought somebody had said to him, "We're not saying 80 is the end of your life, but like, what do you want your next 18 years to look like?" And he went, "I'm going to create the life I want to live." And so he bought a sailboat, learned how to sail, and decided to live on the sailboat, which was based out of Florida. And then he needed crew. So I had been traveling around the world as a volunteer, and I found the same website where I had been finding all my volunteer projects. He had advertised he needed crew. So I applied. And there was something about the photograph. It was a little small passport size photograph. And I thought, I'm going to get it. I knew a lot of people would be applying for the job because it was to sail the boat from Florida to the Bahamas. What's not to love about that, right? And two, I thought there's something about him. He's going to mean something in my life, and I didn't know what. And it certainly wasn't any romantic notion. I just knew there was something about this person. So anyway, so I arrived on the boat in January of 2016 for 1 month. And the interesting thing, back to the conversation about screen time, when you live 24/7 on a sailboat with only one other person, with no internet, no cell service, no Wi-Fi to speak of, you've only one thing to do. A, work and get the boat where it needs to go. But B, when you've got downtime, you just talk to each other. And we talked and we talked and we talked. And when the month was over, we were still talking. And I stayed on the boat for, I think it was 4 months of that period. And then there was a something very profound in our connection. He had a master's degree in spiritual psychology, and I had come from a year working or not working with, but learning an awful lot from Tony Robbins and the concepts of they were very similar, but there were two different processes of how we both got to the same kind of ideology, let's say. And after the somewhere on those 4 months in the beautiful waters of the Bahamas, I fell in love. He not so much. And initially, well, he knew he liked me, and he wasn't ready to commit because like I said, he'd been in a long-term relationship, a long-term marriage, and he was just looking to have a nice, easy life, right? But we came back to America, brought the boat back, and he went back to California. And I actually ended up staying on the boat for another 2 months while I was waiting to go to Ireland for a family reunion. And about after we said goodbye, and I thought, for the first time, I thought, you know, it's not a failed relationship, but it had this feeling of what it could have been. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel clingy as a girlfriend, and I was prepared to let him go. And I just got to that beautiful place of thinking, well, I am a better human for having that person pass through my life. Even if, somebody comes into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. I thought even if it was just this season, it was amazing. And I am a better human as a result. And once I got to that place in the decision of that process, next thing the phone rings, and he goes, well, when are you going to Ireland? I'm taking the boat out early. Do you want to come and sail up to New Jersey with me? And I went, okay, because I had time to fill. And he ended up coming to Ireland, met my family, and they all loved him. And I came back on the boat and we started sailing. And we ended up 6 years on the boat. And we were 4 years into it when he proposed to me on the deck of the boat, and it was extraordinary. And one of the things he said at the time was, he said, "Thank you for your patience in letting me process how I felt." You know, and there's somebody who, to me, he was 72 when he got certified as a scuba instructor or scuba diver for the first time. You know, he's gone out and done things, and now the two of us are guest speakers on celebrity cruises. You know, so we're working together on things like that, and not only does he bring joy to my life, but the bottom line was he made me a better me.
That's a fantastic way to describe any relationship, I think, that somebody makes you a better me. And I guess in terms of this podcast, through, I suppose, having a sense of faith in my life, I find that sense comes through that as well as my human relationship. I'm lucky to find that from my wife as well, and um, I guess when I think of your story, and I've really enjoyed your book so much. You've seen so many cultures around the world. I know you're educated in Ireland by nuns, and there are sometimes little references in your writing where you've obviously been thinking of things, I think, through some sort of a faith lens. I wonder, would you say yourself, does faith play an important part in your life?
Yes, I would. And I think that faith can mean an awful lot of different things. Do I go to church on every Sunday? No, I don't. I do feel very spiritually connected. I believe in God, universe, spirit, whatever you want to call that higher power. And I do believe there's a guiding light in that. I think it's something we can ignore. I think, like anything, one phrase my dad taught me was, when you know something, you can't not know it anymore. You can ignore it, but you can't not know it. And I think I've always been just this sense outside of myself. Do you know what I mean? That there is something bigger than me. There is a spiritual um drive, if you like, and I definitely feel connected in that respect. And I see that when I see other people as well, you know. Um, yes, I was raised with Catholic, I can never even say the word catechism, is like where it's like, who is God? God is my Father in heaven. Who is the folk? You know what I mean? That kind of thing drilled into us as school children. And yes, I started to, when I met people in Paris when I was 17, they came from a lot of different religions. And believe it or not, in Paris, there was three subjects we were not allowed to talk about in class. One was religion, one was sex, and one was politics. You know,
Mhm.
and so everybody had to stay with, because there were contentious issues across the board. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so yes, I definitely I believe in an afterlife. I believe that we are souls having a human experience, and I think I often it's a weird thing. It's very hard to describe. It's almost like I reach outside myself and inside myself at the same time when I'm at those moments. And I do get little, everybody sort of says, "Oh, you can get a sign from the other side" or something else like that. But my dad pops up in the music of the mission sometimes. Um, and these are things that you can attribute meaning to or not, whether they're true or not for you or for somebody else. They think, oh, that's just wind chimey kind of talk. um but yes, I definitely have faith. I think that we're all here together as souls having a human experience.
Yeah, and I think sometimes again, I would sometimes say that people reveal God to us in a
Mm,
way through their presence or through the things that are within them.
hmm.
And there are sometimes I meet people, I'm very privileged in the work that I do, where maybe I meet people in all sorts of circumstances, and they very particularly I notice particularly a lot of older people say to me, I don't know where I would be if I didn't have a belief or a sense of, and that's particularly maybe when they're in those really difficult sort of situations. And you describe some of those in your own uh, memoir as well, where again, they were in a very difficult place, and they kind of needed to take the next step, and they felt that somehow God gave them the strength to do that at that moment. And people have a quite a powerful sense of that. And I always find that very humbling and very inspiring when I meet it in people. And I'm very fortunate I meet it quite a bit. Um, I guess it's been really fascinating hearing all about your travels and your life and um my sense is that if people get a hold of your book, can you remind them A, of the title of your book, and B, if they wanted to reach out to you or find you, where would they do that?
Sure. So the book is called Following Sunshine, A Voyage Around the Mind, Around the World, Around the Heart. And just to break it down for you, those three parts are actually the three parts of the book. Around the mind is the childhood growing up in Ireland, overcoming some issues, understanding that there's a bigger world out there, and the start of my travels, if you like. The second part, around the world, is the year I took out when I was living in Sark, and then moved around the world in one direction, volunteering as I went. And then the third part, around at the heart, is when I stepped on the boat for Captain Krieger and started crewing it. And so it's the final love story, if you like. So that's available on Amazon and all the usual online shops, etc. But the best way to get a hold of me is if you go to my website, which is called thewriteronthewater.com, which is a lot easier to spell than my name. So that's why we went there. So it's www.thewriteronthewater.com. And on there, you'll find a whole range of writings and galleries of photographs of the travels, and also all the different handles for my social media, like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter and LinkedIn and all that good stuff. And then just what finally I wanted to add to something you just said there a moment ago. We're talking about faith. One thing for me where I really feel connected with faith is in nature. And, it's almost like that's my church without walls.
Yeah.
And the power, like sometimes when the ocean is angry at you, the power of that, and then also some serene, beautiful, calm water. And we're back to the screen thing. So surrounding yourself in nature for me is where I feel the most connected.
Okay, that's powerful. So it's a place where you would feel kind of God's presence, maybe in a way, or
That's exactly what that's exactly it. I remember one Christmas, I sometimes go to church on Christmas. I guess that's tradition and pageantry for me in one respect. You know what I mean? I loved all that growing up. It's so many childhood memories of it. But I remember one Christmas when I was in my 30s, I think I was down in Key Largo, and I took my kayak out and I was paddling this calm water, and these dolphins were swimming around my boat the whole time. And it was just, I never felt more a presence of God probably than in that moment. And so I think God, like they say about is what if God is one of us and what if God is all around us. It's not God is my Father in heaven anymore for me.
yeah.
But anyway, yes, I just wanted to add that in for you.
No, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for your time today. And we hope that people will enjoy the episode, and hopefully maybe have a check out on your platform. The Writer on the Water is the website, and there's lots of good stuff there for people to see and to get a sense of your writing. And thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Well,
Have a
thank
great
you so
day.
much for having me on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's all for this week. Thank you for listening, and if you were kind enough to hit follow or subscribe, or even leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, that'd be greatly appreciated. Join me again next week for another bite-sized chunk of faith.